Yes, so welcome to the Galloway Hydro Scheme, past and present, with hosted by myself with the Galloway Glens and in partnership with Drax, the current owners of the Galloway Hydro Scheme, of course. And lovely to see some familiar faces. So welcome everybody. Really nice to see the friendly faces. I'm going to give a quick overview. Some of you have heard this all before, I'm afraid, but you know I'm going to do it. The Galloway Glens is a National Lottery Heritage funded suite of projects. It's funded for 5 years. We're 3 years through already, which is kind of scary when you think of it. But hopefully, if you do live here in the Galloway Glens area, you're starting to see some of the impact of the project over the years. For those of you who aren't in the area, it's southwest Scotland, remote rural southwest Scotland, really, from the wild wetlands behind Carsfen and the Glen Kens, and then following the course of the river catchments of the Ken and Dee rivers through the Glen Kens, past beautiful Loch Hen, and out to the sea at through the market town of Castle Douglas and out to the sea at Kirkcudbright. So we take in a lot of wildlands, some sort of remote settlements, and a couple of market towns. And those of you who know it will know it's looking its absolute best at the moment as the spring starts to come. So that's lovely. Our National Lottery Heritage funding gives us core funding. They've invested £2.7 million over the 5 years, but with our 35 headline projects, that's matched up by our partners to a total investment of £5 million over the 5 years. So it is a big deal, I think. And this is part of our community activities project, which sort of covers a multitude of sins, but it's continuing our programme of online events that we started in May 2020 in response to the pandemic. We obviously had to shift a lot of our delivery online, but there's definite silver linings. We've been able to reach a lot of new people and have little different sorts of communities going on. So this is part of that scheme. As I said, this event is in partnership with Drax. I'm going to introduce the speakers in a minute, but I just want to say a big thank you to Sarah Cameron of Drax for her support in putting this programme on. That's been really helpful. It's lovely to be working in partnership with an important stakeholder in the region. And you'll hear from Sarah later because she did the voiceover for the video. But I want to, without further ado, move on to introducing the speakers. Stuart Ferns, I don't know, Stuart, if you want to unmute and say hello.
Hello there.
Hi, that's Stuart. Stuart is the Operations and Maintenance Manager for the Galloway and Lanark Hydro Schemes. He graduated in Mechanical Engineering at Strathclyde University, worked in the electricity industry for 32 years and spent quite a few of those, I think, on the Galloway scheme. So very up to date with all the details of the management of the scheme. Stuart lives in Dumfries. And then the second speaker, we've got Claire Williamson. Hi, Claire. There we go, that's Claire. Some of you may know Claire from her Can You Dig It incarnations. Can You Dig It is our community archaeology project, and Claire's been delivering that for us over the last 2 years. And that was our 2020 online event programme, was very heavily based around Can You Dig It. But she's here today in a slightly different capacity as the main speaker. So Claire graduated from the University of Glasgow in 2005 with a degree in archaeology and anthropology. Since then, she's worked continuously in commercial archaeology as a field archaeologist, including excavations of a medieval site at the Townhouse in Irvine, an Iron Age settlement at Auchenranny in Brodick, and a community dig at Ardrossan Castle. And as I say, more recently, seemed to be spending almost all of her time working for us on Can You Dig It, which is fantastic. So the format for the evening, I'm going to show you a short introductory video that Drax has made for us. That's got some really interesting footage of the behind the scenes of the hydro scheme. Then I'm going to hand over to Claire. She'll take us through the cultural and social impact of the construction all those years ago, which I think is quite new research actually. So I'm looking forward to that. And then back to Stuart, who's going to bring us right up to date with an overview of the kind of considerations and constraints of operating the modern day scheme. We will break for questions after Claire and again after Stuart. I'm going to keep everybody muted throughout because there's quite a lot of you there. But do feel free to use the chat. I don't know if the chat's going already, but those of you who've been to one of my events before, you'll know that I like to get a bit of chat, a bit of interactivity. We usually have a very informed and engaged audience, so you might find your questions being answered within the chat, which is always brilliant. If you don't like the chat and you find it distracting, you can minimize the window. So just don't worry about it. and we'll plan to finish about 9 o'clock. So with no further ado, I'm going to see about this video, which is a first for me, so we'll just have to...
Hydropower is one of the most widespread sources of electricity generation in the world. It is also one of the biggest. 9 of the world's 10 largest power stations are hydro-powered. Commissioned in 1935, the Galloway Hydro Scheme was the first large-scale integrated hydroelectric complex to be built in Britain and consists of 6 power stations, 9 dams and a 10-mile network of tunnels, aqueducts and pipelines. 1,500 people were employed over the 5-year construction period. Drawing enough energy from local rivers to support 5 generating power stations, the project was the largest run-of-river scheme ever created. The scheme was expanded to include another power station at Drum John in 1986. Today, these 6 power stations, based at Glen Lee, Tongland, Kendoon, Drum John, Earlston and Carstvad, have a combined generating capacity of 108 megawatts. With an annual average output of 250 gigawatt hours, the hydro scheme produces enough electricity to power 70,000 homes. The Galloway scheme spans the entirety of its river system, from Loch Doon in the north to Tongland in the south. Utilising the natural flow of the rivers, man-made and natural lochs, the scheme stretches 40 miles north to south and 10 miles east to west. This gives the scheme a catchment area of 400 square miles. Loch Doon and Clatteringshaw's Loch act as the main storage lochs for the scheme, storing rainfall over the winter months, which can be utilised when needed most. The scheme has an average annual rainfall of 1,750 millimetres and a maximum reservoir capacity of 122 million cubic metres. Galloway Hydro Scheme is used to generate power when there are peaks in electricity demand. To do this, it operates as a conventional hydro storage scheme where dams situated along the river are used to create small reservoirs. When demand for electricity peaks, typically between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m, water is released from these reservoirs and used to spin turbines and generate electricity. The amount of electrical power that can be generated is dependent on the water flow and vertical distance. This is known as the head through which the water is flowing. The turbines extract the kinetic energy of flowing water and convert it to mechanical energy through the turbines rotating at 215 RPM. The turbines drive a generator that converts the mechanical energy to electrical energy. The power stations at Kendoon, Carstvad and Earlston can be run together to produce a combined output of between 25 to 50 megawatts. During the day, both schemes are monitored and controlled from Glen Lee Power Station, halfway down the Galloway route. As night falls, responsibility instead falls to the control room at Cruachan Power Station, more than 120 miles away. Around-the-clock monitoring in this way is important, as the uncertainty of Scotland's weather can have effects on the schemes and on their surrounding environment. Dumfries and Galloway is a region defined and dominated by its river systems. As such, extreme weather can lead to occasional natural flooding. The Galloway scheme not only has to be diligent in working during extreme weather conditions, but it can actually play a role in mitigating the impacts of heavy rainfall and natural flooding events. The Galloway reservoirs help to alleviate flooding, as they can store water and help to alleviate flooding downstream. Drax Hydro colleagues work closely with local authorities, emergency services and the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, sharing their weather forecasting and reservoir level data to help them predict which areas will be affected and when roads might need to be closed, and informing local residents and farmers of potential flooding. Galloway Hydro Scheme operates across protected nature sites, including sites of special scientific interest, special protected areas and wetlands of an international importance. Drax colleagues actively help enhance biodiversity, for example managing water levels on Loch Hen and managing maintenance at our sites during bird nesting season. Drax have long-standing partnerships with the local salmon fishery boards and fisheries trusts to protect Atlantic salmon in the rivers Dee, Ken and Doon. This includes supporting Galloway Fisheries Trust Smolt Tracking Project in 2021. In 2019, Drax Group pledged £100,000 over 4 years to support community initiatives in the Galloway Glens region, delivered through the Galloway Glens Landscape Partnership Scheme, as part of our efforts to support those living in the areas in which we operate. Scotland has a long and proud history of hydroelectricity. Drax is ensuring the power stations within the Galloway Hydro Scheme play an important part in securing a net zero carbon future for our country.
Great. Well, I think that was a lovely overview of the scheme and some fabulous footage of the Glenkens countryside. And those of you who know it will remind some good memories there. So I'm going to hand over to Claire now, I think, and Claire can share her screen herself. So yeah, over to you, Claire, for a look back in time at the beginnings of the scheme.
Yes, that was a great video. Actually, I have to say it's quite different. I spent the day looking at old photographs of it in construction, and I have to say that's quite a different look at it, seeing it and what it's like now. So I'm hoping you enjoy the photographs as much as I did when I was looking through them. So yes, I'm going to talk to you tonight. Just say hi everybody, and hope you're all doing well. Thanks for coming along. I'm just going to talk to you through some of the aspects actually went on kind of on the way up to the scheme, on the way up to construction, and also during the construction of the Galloway scheme itself. Before I start, I know acknowledgements are usually at the end, but I had a lot of help from John Jones and Ted Leeming that sent me a lot of photographs, and John sent me lots of articles and information that I couldn't have done tonight without it. So I just kind of want to say that in a way they're co-presenting with me, but I will take the full blame for how I've put everything together, don't worry. So I'm going to fire through. I have lots of pictures, so you can zone out and look at the pictures if you want, but hopefully I'll touch briefly on all the different things that I've come across. So to start, I just wanted to put a map up of the location. Most of you might know where it is, but so that's Loch Doon. So that sits into Ayrshire, and then obviously the rest of the scheme flows down Dumfries and Galloway. Earlston is just above St Johnstown of Dalry, known locally as Dalry, and Clatteringshaw's Loch is here. Loch Ken, and then obviously it flowed, Tungland is down here, and then it flows out at Kirkcudbright. So it was just to give you that rough kind of idea, so you know roughly where we are. And then this is a nice one that was sent through to me, Ted. It's a kind of pictorial kind of outlay of the scheme. Just while I talk, I'm just going to give you a kind of brief introduction to how it came about. So before it was built, there were a number of proposals that had been put forward to develop hydroelectricity in the area. So the first, it kind of started 1899 with the Marquess of Ailsa. And then it was pursued again in 1923 by two local men from Galloway, which was Major Wellwood Maxwell and Captain Scott Elliott. And now they appointed William McClellan, a native of Dalbeattie and a partner in the consulting electrical engineers company called Mertz and McClelland. Now later, Sir Alexander Gibb and partners, consulting civil engineers were brought on board, and the designer in chief for the whole project was one of their employees, James Williamson. Although the potential was there, none of these earlier kind of proposals and looks into doing the scheme actually made it off the ground. There was a variety of reasons, but one of them was the problem of distribution of power to a widely dispersed population at the time. This all changed, however, in the Electricity Supply Act in 1926 and the formation of the National Grid, which eased problems with export and distribution of power. The Galloway Power Bill received royal assent in May 1929, and the Galloway Water Power Company was incorporated to develop the scheme. Now, I've put up this lovely poem that is just to demonstrate to yourselves. I'm not going to read it because I won't put you through that, but feel free. But this is the initial opposition to the scheme was fierce, diverse, and daunting. Now, issues included fishing, aesthetics, coal interests, antiquities, industries, and community interests. Now, the good part about all this local resistance was that it made sure that great importance was attached to these aspects of the scheme. When the scheme was granted royal assent in 1929, it contained an amenity clause, which left no doubt about the high priority to be given to environmental and also fishing interests. Now, to ensure that this regard was maintained, the Secretary of State for Scotland was empowered to appoint an amenity community who maintained close cooperation with the company and their engineers. Similar committees would henceforth be a compulsory feature of all hydroelectric developments. So I just wanted to talk to you about two aspects of this. So this is us kind of still in the planning phase, or the coming in to getting it commissioned in the 30s. Firstly, I was going to look at a couple of heritage sites, and secondly, I'll also briefly touch on fishing rights, because that was quite a big deal. So first up is, we'll head kind of to Loch Doon, which sits at the northern end of the scheme. Now, during the planning stages of the scheme, at the centre of the loch stood Loch Doon Castle on, funnily enough, Castle Island. That was what it's called. Now, this is an early example of a stone castle that was originally built in the 13th century. Now, the dam at Loch Doon would eventually raise the water level by 27 feet. Now, this would have largely submerged the castle, which was what they were originally planning to do. But then there was a lot of public outcry and pressure. And thankfully, well, yeah, they then buckled to the pressure. I'll say thankfully because it's a bit of a strange one, Loch Doon Castle, because what they did instead was they dismantled the ruined castle and rebuilt it on a site roughly 400 metres to the north on kind of the mainland donated by the Marquess of Ailsa. So what they did was all the dress stonework of the castle was carefully dismantled around 1935, numbered and accurately re-erected by the Ministry of Works Department, while the wall core material, the kind of rubble, was left from the curtain wall, was left on the island. Now, this is a rare example of an early 20th century large-scale conservation project, which indicates the considerable importance attached to the fabric of the monument at the time. There had been a later addition to the castle while it was on the island from the 16th century. But what is a little strange is when they relocated it to the mainland, they chose not to recreate the later addition and later repair work. And actually they only did the original stonework, which they said, I think they felt left the earlier castle unencumbered, which is kind of a strange, you're taking it a little bit of history there, but that was obviously what they were keen on the 13th century castle. It's worth going to see Loch Doon Castle because it's an octagonal castle as well, which is a bit unusual, so it's lovely. And then this is a wee picture, I don't know if you can see, but you can actually, when the level is low in the loch, you can see the top of Castle Island along with some of the stones. I mean, you can even still make out the shape of Loch Doon Castle, but today, and then you can see where it's been moved to up, just to the north over here. Today, both the castle and as it's upstanding and the original site are legally protected as scheduled monuments. Now, the second example I wanted to show you is this large rock. So this is called Bruce's Stone, and it sits at Clatteringshaw's Loch. Now, the story, in March 1307, Robert the Bruce was hiding out in the hills around Moss Raploch. An English army has camped here, and Bruce sets upon them at dawn while they're sleeping. As the Scots picked over the dead for wind and booty, Bruce takes time to rest against a large stone, now known as Bruce's Stone. The battle site is said to have been at Craignell, which is now submerged by the reservoir. Now, Bruce's stone, although I've heard one account say that it was moved, but I think by most accounts it seems to have been this is where it sat. And so it seems to have been by chance marginally above the top water level of Clatteringshaw's Loch. Now, it was, however, the subject of delicate and prickly negotiations with the landowner, the Earl of Mar, who claimed direct descent from Robert the Bruce. Now, the Earl bought Clatteringshaw's farm in 1927 for £1,200, but sought £4,500 in January 1929 to accommodate the new loch in which the Moss Raploch battlefield was to be submerged. Settlement was agreed 3 months later at £1,900. That's what he went for, subject to the Earl retaining the site of the stone. Although, surprisingly, he gifted the stone to the National Trust only 3 years later. So it gave away. Seems to be fine. Nowadays, you can still visit Bruce's stone where it sits near to the Clatteringshaw's Visitor Centre. Now, just before we move on, there was another complaint featured in a letter in the Galloway News, which was published in June 1934. Someone wasn't happy when they heard that the new reservoir was going to be called Clatteringshaw's Loch after the name of the adjacent farm. They felt that this name was uncouth and had no significance. In their eyes, the moor, which was originally called Moss Raploch, with its connections to Robert the Bruce, had much more historical significance and suggested that it instead be called Loch Raploch, which, yeah, no. I'm not sure that would have been as easy to say. So. They went for Clatteringshaw's, that seems to be. Okay, so the next one I want to talk to you about was fishing rights. I love this photo. Some good beard action, and then we've got some pipes going on there, so that's lovely. So in order to obtain parliamentary approval, the promoters also had to diffuse concerns that hydropower would damage salmon fishing on the River Dee. Now, to safeguard the fishing rights of influential owners, the supervision of the fisheries was placed under the Fishery Board for Scotland. Now, ingenious methods was to make sure salmon were not discouraged from going about their natural business of returning to the river of their birth to sport. After much research and experimentation, the promoters provided fish passes, ladders, and resting pools to ensure spawning salmon would continue to have access to the upper reaches. The fish ladders put in at Tungland, Earlston, and Carsfad were the highest constructed at the time in Britain at around 70 feet. Now, such was the attention paid in promoters' plans to the survival of the salmon fishery by the installation of fish passes that an engineer commented at the time, one might almost have been led to believe that it was a scheme for the preservation and improvement of the salmon fisheries on the River Dee. Now, this is the pass at Tungland Dam was the first to be put into service in April 1935, and its operation was watched with a good deal of interest. Now, I'm aware the photo is not Tungland, it's Earlston, but I had a photo. It's a fish ladder. Now, at the time when they opened up the Tungland fish ladder, they were encountering a certain amount of trouble with the fishing proprietors, and the engineers were so satisfied that all was well that they invited them to come and see what was happening. They came on a Sunday, the sluices were closed down, and accounts showed that 64 salmon were on their way up the ladder, which they thought was remarkably good considering that it had only been operating for a little over a week. So do not underestimate the power of fishing rights and people with their salmon, but it's done them well. So now I want to talk about the construction. So the construction of the hydro scheme was undertaken in 2 stages, and it took place over 5 years from 1931 to 1936. The fact that the scheme would create thousands of jobs was a large part of its success in getting it through Parliament. The total expenditure on the Galloway hydroelectric development amounted approximately to £3 million, of which 1.84 million was accounted for by the constructional engineering contracts. I'll be interested to see if any of these trigger memories for Stuart, if he can recognise where certain things were. So the scheme was under obligations to engage local labourers, but as it occurred at the time of the Great Depression in the 1930s, labour exchanges across the country were often prompting their unemployed population to seek work in Galloway. The result was that hundreds of men converged on places such as Castle Douglas and Kirkcudbright, seeking not only employment but also accommodation. At the peak of its stage 1 construction, so around 1933, some 1,500 men were employed on the scheme. Now, I don't know the exact breakdown in numbers between local workers and those that came in from elsewhere in the final number that were working on the sites. Generally, there's quite a big turnaround of the staff. A wee bit later on, I'll talk about the fact that they tend to move quite quickly. It was a very much, you know, you would gain the job, you would maybe only be there for a short while before you moved on type idea. But I can say that in May 1932, the Galloway News reported that as the local centre for the major operations, Castle Douglas has assumed a busy industrial complexion. Up to date, almost 900 workers from all parts of the country have been passed on through the local exchange. Until they are absorbed, these men have to be accommodated in the town, and especially at the weekends, the provision of shelter has become an acute problem, every available place being commandeered. Bands of young men, all strangers to the locality, who patrol the streets waiting in their turn, bring home in a very real sense the big unemployment market. So there was various contractors brought onto the scheme. But although various sections of the works were carried out by different contractors, the methods of construction adopted were generally quite similar. There's no doubting that it was hard work, that it was extremely labour intensive, and at times it could be quite dangerous. According to George Hill, who wrote the book Tunnel and Dam, he wrote that an examination of the Galloway News between April and October 1933, during a 6-month period at the height of the Stage 1 construction programme, reveals that 5 men lost their lives and 16 were seriously injured on the various ongoing construction tasks. A memorial to the men who died during the construction has been erected adjacent to the remote surge shaft at Glen Lee. Now, overall, 60% of the injuries and 40% of the deaths occurred at Glen Lee Tunnel. Now, the Glen Lee Tunnel was the most expensive and arguably the most difficult and impressive civil engineering contract undertaken as part of the scheme. This contract was signed during March 1932. The tunnel was driven for 3.5 miles through solid rock and was excavated simultaneously from 6 different faces. It took over 2 years to complete. Of the 1,500 men that were employed at the height of Stage 1 construction, 500 were working at Glen Lee Tunnel. But despite the hard work, the men seemed to have some good memories of it. Amongst the material that John sent through to me were 2 accounts from men who actually worked on the scheme. One was Willie Cairns, and that was reported in the Glasgow Herald in the 1980s, and the other one was John Hunter, also known as Sani. So I'll just kind of mix in some of the things that they've said. Now, they reported that the eager contractors came from all over the country. Scots, local Galloway men, some men from England, and a lot from Ireland. They described them as a kind of motley crew, a kind of, nomadic workers that would move around quite a lot. They both explained that the 30s were the days of hire and fire, when the employer could sack on the spot for little or no reason. Equally, a man could throw in his job at a moment's notice. Some had itchy feet, and there are many who left in order to avoid the inland revenue. Apparently this was a big no-no, giving money to the government. So, as well as the men they called navvies, there were quite a few tradesmen in the job. Joiners, blacksmiths, sawyers, quarrymen, whom they called suggers, crane and engine drivers. But predominantly, of course, was the navvy, and what a number of skills they had in their ranks, this is what they're saying. Plate layers, drillers, concrete workers, gangers, pump attendants, timbermen, steel erectors, sparkies, as well as a skillful art of being a good man with a pick and shovel. It certainly took them all to build the dam. Okay. And between the 2 of them, they also mentioned that there was a lot of nicknames going on about these colourful characters. So I'm going to definitely read these. Slusher Tom, May Morning, Horse Ryan, Hashy Dan, and Stonebreaker Docherty were some of the ones they've said. Of Stonebreaker, he could smash a stone on his chest. He had the biggest chest I've ever seen in my life, yet he wasn't very big, reminisces Willie Cairns. And every time he went to Newton Stewart, he bought a new bonnet. So that's obviously quite memorable because that was 50 years later, and that was the thing he remembered about the guy, was that he was always buying a new hat every time he went. But and then in fairness, actually, while you look at this photo and all the photos, you'll notice that the health and safety gear of the 1930s is a bit different from what we have now. And I would say that I think the cap was essentially as close as they got to a hard hat. But a lot of them wore the caps, so maybe they were worried about sun protection. Something. Okay, so Willie worked in the Glen Lee Tunnel. It was grim work. The men, up to 100 on a shift, laboured in a space only twice the height of the average man, space already crowded by roofing gantries, steam shovels, jaggers and pugs. The navvies, enveloped by the noise of vibrating steel, repeatedly bored, blasted and marked out for 8 hours at a stretch, 12 if they were on a long shift. But a shift threw up some amusing moments, Willie recalls, and this is another one of his memories. I've been maybe a mile and a half inside the tunnel and there was a frog. I've had it in my hand, yet they were blasting 100 pounds of explosives every 8 hours. How the thing survived, I'll never know, but there it was. There you go, that was what he remembered. Now, both mentioned that Shanks and McEwen had arguably the best black squad in the business. The black squad being the crane and engine drivers and the men who maintained the machinery. John was elevated to the squad at Clatteringshaw's and was part of the team who built a 15-ton steam crane from its foundations in one day, steaming ready for action at night. Now, this is a record for Shanks, and Sani, John Hunter, explains that if this was so, it would be a record for anyone. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the scheme was obligated to preferentially give work to the locals. But a contentious issue, however, was that all the local workers did feel that they were suffering discrimination. They were all charged, all of the workers on the site were to be charged half of their wage to go towards camp accommodation, even those that were working within easy reach of home. Now, this remained an issue of bitter contention throughout the works. Ultimately, as a result of consistent complaints from the unemployed of Dalbeattie, a workers' bus was organised to run morning and evening to the Tungland site in a bid to alleviate the friction. In general, the employment or lack of employment of local labour tended to be a source of trouble off and on for the duration of the construction. These were investigated by local authorities, denied by the employers, and generally put in the pending file until resurrected by the irate local unemployed, whereupon the cycle would begin again. So I don't think it was ever really resolved, but it just kept creeping up, coming up every now and again. Another bone of contention with the locals was reported in the Galloway News in July 1932. They drew attention to the abnormal amount of Sunday work and haulage going on in connection with the hydroelectric operations in that district. The congregation of Kells was very much disturbed and felt very considerably the interference with the amenity of the district and the peace of Sundays. The presbytery supported the congregation and their protest and decided to make a representation to the various contractors asking them to stop or at least considerably curtail the operations on Sundays. I didn't see what the result of this was, but I'm assuming that yes, they would. They would probably have listened because the locals seem very vocal, I would say, during this scheme. Now, I don't have photos of the camps I'm about to talk to, so I'll just kind of keep going with more working shots, but it'll give you the feel for the area and the works at the time. And the remote location, this comes up a few times. Now, the remote location of the works meant that the employers had to set up workers' camps to give accommodation for those coming in from elsewhere. In the early days, the men bunked in tents and wooden caravans, but later villages of wooden huts were built, although they were of fairly simple standard. 8 huts were erected at 3 different places: Clatteringshaw's, the point of entrance to the tunnel, and midway where a shaft was being made. Altogether, accommodation was being provided for some 400 men. Willie and Sani both pointed out that every camp had its poets, philosophers, soothsayers, and a lifetime of characters. They say that the navvy was mainly a generous man when he was in front, and a man out of work and coming around the camp was allowed to go away hungry or penniless. Now, although the labourers lived and worked in the depths of the Cushire Hills, they were not isolated. The citizens of the towns and villages performed concerts which were very popular with the men. Local grocers and butchers' vans visited regularly to trade. So did the Pack Manor clothes outfitter, wily enough always to time his visits for payday. Now, one character that stands out is Reverend Thomas P. Hitman. That's a good name, and it will forever stick in my mind. Now, Reverend Hitman was a missionary appointed by the Presbytery of Kirkcudbright in 1932. The Reverend became totally involved in his new charge, conducting Sunday services at Glen Lee, Craigen Bay, Craigshinnie and Clatteringshaw's camps, and organising regular weekly camp concerts using not only local talent, but also involving the men themselves. So, for example, on the 15th of December 1932, the entertainment was provided by a concert party from Castle Douglas with a welcome interlude by one of the workmen, Mr. Sullivan, who sang two songs and gave a skillful exhibition of step dancing. Library facilities were set up at each camp, as well as radio facilities and a variety of indoor games, including billiards, carpet bowls, draughts and darts were all provided as well. Realising the hazardous nature of the work, the Reverend also made himself available every morning from 10:30 till noon at Glen Lee Camp during the tunnel excavations for first aid work. He also visited the sick and injured cases in hospital. As George Hill states, in order to appreciate Reverend Hitman's commitment, it is necessary to comprehend the fragmented nature of the construction sites. Initially, Reverend Hitman travelled around the camps by bicycle or public transport. However, as the number of operational sites increased and his average weekly mileage rose to 160 miles, the Presbytery provided him with a motorcycle. Despite the hazardous and demanding nature of his duties, Reverend Hitman always seems to be in the midst of action and was highly respected by employers and workers. I'm only realising now that I keep saying Reverend Hitman because that's what I'm used to that word, but actually it's probably more Reverend Hitman. I'm still going to call him Hitman. That's what's going to happen. Right. Welfare and recreation considerations were also seen as important during stage 2 of the construction. As the work extended in the direction of Carsfairn and Loch Doon, 9 camps were set up at various points across the area. The Galloway Power Works Recreation Committee was formed in September 1934 to encourage and organise social events. The committee consisted of representatives of the various companies involved in the scheme, plus local dignitaries. In addition to the Stage 1 facilities already in existence, recreation huts were provided at Drumjohn, Kendoon, Earlston and Loch Doon. The committee also won support from the YMCA, and this organisation provided, equipped and maintained a large recreational hut adjacent to the Carsfad Works. Now, this is a picture at Carsfad, but I don't think that's probably the recreation building. I think that's maybe the main kind of power station, although that would be a pretty good sized recreational building. That would be not bad, I think. But it's the picture I had. At least it's at Carsfad. Now, these premises not only contained indoor recreational facilities, but also a canteen and hot baths. In addition, a football league was started. Every contractor provided a team, and local teams from Dalry and Moniaive also participated. Although the facilities were rudimentary, the situation was much better than it might have been. This was due not only to the provision of essential facilities, but also because of the social interaction between the construction workers and local residents. How about now? I think things are slightly changed in everyone's attitude to the hydro scheme. So Historic Environment Scotland, they have all of the power station and the dams are protected as listed buildings. They have statements that say the Galloway scheme was the first example of river run technology to be successfully utilised on a large scale in Scotland. It predates the 1943 Hydroelectric Scotland Act, which formalised the development of hydroelectricity in Scotland. The completion of the scheme without a national strategic policy framework is groundbreaking, as is the consistency of high quality, aesthetic and engineering design across all of the schemes. Now, the safeguards that were put on the landscape and the amenity of the area proved influential for the hydro schemes that followed. Now, for those that worked there, there was obviously such a large people that were responsible for the construction. Thousands of people constructed these huge kind of infrastructure, these huge dams and power stations that we kind of probably forget that that's all the work that went behind these structures. And it was very dangerous work. But in the words of Willie, he was saying that according to Willie, the old hands, the travelling labourers, used to caution, it'll never come off, it'll never come off. But, says Willie triumphantly, it did come off, and it's been a real wee money spinner ever since. And for John Hunter, he said, altogether, although it was a hard life, many a time I felt that I would be poorer without it. And as for the locals, I think everybody's is very proud of the hydro scheme now. It's certainly become a feature in the landscape. And I would have to say that it is I'll say it again, it was the persistence and speaking up of the locals, I think, that helped to carve it into the success that it still is today. I think that was a big role. And just finally, just to say a big thank you to everyone. Thank you to Helen and Stuart for having me along tonight. Thank you all for coming along to listen. And thank you also back again to John and Ted, and also to all of the photos that I was able to find online. Thank you for everyone who's ever put an old photo up of the hydro scheme. I am very grateful because they are lovely. And that is me, I think. I hope that wasn't too long.
Fabulous, Claire. Thank you so much. Really interesting. I think that so much in there, wasn't it? That actually what I'm taking away from it now mostly is, yeah, you know, the value of community engagement. I don't know if they knew that's what they were doing. I don't know if they appreciated it, but it sounds like they got it, and it sounds like it was influential, and that's made a big difference to what we see now. So there's maybe something in us all for that. But yeah, loving that. There were a few questions in the chat, so let's put you to the test. Absolutely brilliant to see all the memories coming back, by the way, of people. I mean, obviously people have got such fond memories of it from, I don't know, decades ago. Elaine was asking whether any women engineers were engaged in the work. I mean, there is quite a strong tradition of female engineering in Galloway, as we know, but did you come across any women engineers?
I didn't come across any female names. I know what you mean, because I keep saying 1,500 men and all the men that were employed, and I'm aware that no doubt there'll be some women in there, surely, but I didn't actually come across any specific names. But whether, I don't know whether they just aren't being named, you know, they might have been in there, but yeah, they've only kind of mentioned, because I mean, actually you don't get a lot of the workers' names anyway. It's really those kind of head, most well-known, prominent engineer, you know, people at the top that are essentially the names of them.
Yeah, and again, Elaine's referenced Dorothy Pollinger, obviously, with the Galloway car factory, and she used turbines apparently at Tunland to use water power for the factory, and that predates the hydro scheme. Was that linked to the scheme? I don't know if you've come across that, Stuart.
No, there is an old mill at Tunland that I'm not sure what it was used for, but that predated the scheme. I don't think that was for a car factory. I don't think so.
No, just thinking outside the box, I guess. Yes, I like your point that we now use grit blasters rather than people to get the paint off nowadays. Just having a scroll through for any more questions. Yeah, no, people enjoyed it, I think, very much, Claire. Oh, here we go, Ian coming in just right now. Right. Was Charles Oppenheimer commissioned to paint a series of views?
Yes, well, yes, I didn't have time to squeeze him in, but yes, I don't know where they are on display though. I see the second part of your question, but yes, I came across him. I think he was commissioned because they were trying to give it a bit of a boost. But John actually wrote that Charles, I think, spent some time on the jury. There was one case where they died in the tunnel. There was one, I think it was one I read about, that was somebody that got electrocuted. I think it was the same Jamie, I think his name was. And Oppenheimer was apparently on the jury, and John wondered if that influenced him a bit in wanting to kind of do the paintings as well. But I did read in one place, which I can double check, it was commissioned by the kind of hydro scheme to try and promote.
Oh yeah, Elaine's saying that some are on display in the council buildings, so yeah, that's something to look at. We can have a look, and we'll post any links that we find. We've got Mayfield Hotel Kakubri. Right, we've got some more questions coming in now. This might be potentially more one for Stuart, I don't know, but did they clear the soil from the reservoirs, or did they just set off and flood it? Do we know?
No, I don't know about that one actually. Do you know, Stuart?
I don't think so. I think it was flooded. I don't think they cleared the soil. No.
Yeah, but no record.
Certainly, when you see the reservoirs dewatered, it's very silty and rocky. It doesn't look like it's been cleared. I don't think. I mean, they would have cleared probably the bottom, maybe the rivers to fit the the needle valves at the bottom of the dam. But no, it's not something I'm aware of.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and then Barney's asking, which is interesting again with modern resonances, we see the scheme as an absolute success now. But was it seen like that at the time? You said at the point of construction it was controversial. Claire, did you pick up any sense of at what point people started to embrace it?
Well, I think I read they did when they completed sections of the tunnel, they had a kind of ribbon cutting ceremony. But I did read one place that said that there wasn't a lot in the terms of opening ceremonies, that they didn't do a lot of opening ceremonies when it was actually up and coming at the end of 1936 kind of thing. But I think probably it was seen, I wouldn't have thought it would have taken so long. I'm kind of wondering if they had all this initial backlash, but then essentially by the time it got finished in 1936, it was 5 years of these people being there. So it actually probably sounds like the locals and them did a lot of trade, hung out a lot, social interactions, football. So they probably became very used to them being there. And so it probably wasn't as negative by the end, even when at the end of the construction kind of thing. I know that the labourers, I think Willie and Sani were saying it was sad days when they had to pack up the huts and leave and things like that because they obviously all got quite attached to the area. I'm not sure. I think, and well, certainly with things like the fish ladders, like they say, I think there was fish in the ladder at Tungland on the second day or something like that. So I think they were kind of showing people as they went along that things were being successful. And by all accounts, I think the only major change they had to make was Drum John in the 1980s. They built the station there to make it more efficient, I think it was, or something. Stuart will know about that. But yeah, other than that, it's been running since. So I think as well, actually, there was some stories about lights and then getting electricity to local towns. And I think there was one in Castle Douglas, and it said something like it had the street lighting up, and it was in the newspaper. And I don't know if some people were a bit alarmed at first because they're like, oh, like it's very bright everywhere. But they then got used to it, and then they started liking it again. But there was a wee thing of being like, no, this is what we need, people. Just
yeah. Oh, fascinating. All right, let's have a look at just the last questions. I don't know if you're going to cover this, Stuart. Anne's asking whether any major repair work since construction. That might be covered in your talk, or you might want to come in.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big jobs that we've got on the go just now, just started this year, is the refurbishment of the barrage at Loch Ken. So there's 6 very large gates that span the barrage at Loch Ken, about over 100 metres long. So they're getting refurbished over the next 3 years. So you'll, if you're in that area, you'll be able to see the workers beginning to set up site there just now. So we're investing £6 million over 3 years, which was like twice the cost of building the scheme back in the 30s. So it's probably the biggest investment that we've had to make since the scheme was built. It's the biggest set of gates that we've got in the scheme, and yeah, so it's a big job.
Yeah, but I think did you say that most of the turbines are the originals? Yes, I mean most of the assets are original. Most of the civil structures and the mechanical structures are original. The electrical control and instrumentation systems are all modern, computer control. But most of the things that you see, when you go into the turbine halls, it looks the same as it did back in the 1930s. As I say, barring we have refurbished things and some things we've replaced, but most of it looks the same. Yeah, it's amazing, really, isn't it? I can't think of anything else that would just keep turning out energy with the original infrastructure.
I don't think they honestly thought it would last as long. Yeah. I don't think 85 years later, and again, there's no reason why it couldn't go for another 85 years. Mm-hmm. Everything can be replaced, everything can be fixed. The dams are obviously a key and critical infrastructure. They're the most expensive part, really. The dams. So as long as they're remain in good condition, and they are in good condition, then the scheme keep going for,
Yeah.
for a lot longer. Yeah.
Well, here's a related question. I mean, and you just quail, but could a similar scheme be constructed today? It'd be such a huge job, wouldn't it? I'm just going to turn my light on.
Yeah, good question. Probably not. I would say I don't think they would build the Galloway scheme today. I think it would be too expensive for one, and there would be too many environmental pressures to build it. The cost, is Claire covered in her presentation. There was a high number of deaths, relatively speaking, and injuries. And the health and safety standards back then were nowhere near, well, just really didn't exist. So the modern health and safety standards obviously makes construction activities a lot more expensive, rightly so. So the price would be a lot more than it would be today. So I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Fascinating.
That's not to say they're not still building hydro. I mean, we're still building hydro in the UK, and if the conditions are right, Drax are looking at increasing the output from Crooken, so they're looking at Crooken 2, expanding Crooken Power Station. So we're certainly looking at expanding hydro in the UK. So
Ian was asking, obviously we're carbon-free heating, carbon-free energy is a priority for everyone at the moment. Is there scope to increase the output beyond peak hours? Could it contribute more, or is it optimized for what it does?
Certainly, I mean, what really has increased the output of the hydro scheme, and I've got a slide in this in my presentation, is the increased rainfall over the years. That's increased output by 20% over the last 8 years, and we have looked at methods of increasing the output by increasing the dam levels or abstracting water from other catchments. But again, the cost for the infrastructure and the implications of flooding additional land and roads meant that it's too difficult and too expensive. We have looked in recent years at small compensation turbines that we would install at the bottom of the dams, where we release fish pack, compensation flow, say, for Tomlin Power Station in Loch Doon. But again, these are very small turbines and they're very expensive. So right now, the conditions are right to install those. But there is also the possibility of potentially floating solar in some of the bigger reservoirs. That's got potential, but again, it's got technical difficulties as well. So.
Oh well, I think we'll count our blessings that we've got it installed and just needing to keep going. There are some more questions coming in, but then I think you're going to cover quite some of them in your talk, Stuart. So we can come back to them if you don't.
Okay.
And just a quick one, last one for Claire. Stephen was just asking if you'd come across any Italian labourers, any overseas labourers.
Not in the account to this one, although I think because one of the books that is the Hydro Boys, but that talks about the northern schemes, and I think there was kind of abroad workers and those ones were a wee bit later, I think, but I didn't come across any for the Galloway scheme, but I would be surprised if there wasn't some, because it was this kind of nomadic culture. I would have thought there would be a few workers coming in abroad, but there was none specifically mentioned, unfortunately.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think we'll hand over to Stuart now for his view on the scheme as it stands now. Thank you so much, Claire. That was absolutely brilliant. And as you said, John Jones and Ted Lehman gave you a lot of input into that. So thanks to them. And I don't know if people noticed the Cast Fairn archive. If you've not come across the Cast Fairn archive before, it's got an astonishing repository of old pictures, not just of Cast Fairn, of the surrounding area as well. So it's all been digitised and put online as a Galloway Glens small grants project. So it's worth a rifle through. But anyway, enough of that. Over to you, Stuart, for day operations.
Okay. Well, thanks very much to Helen and the Glen Kens for the opportunity to discuss the operations and maintenance of the Galloway Hydro Scheme. So an overview of the scheme then. So as Claire had said, the scheme was commissioned in 1935-36 on the Kennedy River system. So there's 4 rivers that come into the system. So the Ken, the Dee, the Blackwater Dee, the Duke and Loch Doon, effectively the 4 main river systems that supply the reservoirs. And again, 109 megawatt peak output. So that's, we very rarely ever achieved 109 megawatts. 109 megawatts is the maximum rated capacity of the turbine. So I would assume, all the dams are full and everything's running and screens are clean. And but typically we run just above 100 megawatts. And as Claire mentioned as well, the original scheme when they looked at this was going to be a lot smaller than that because there just wasn't the local demand for power in the south of Scotland, so there was nowhere for power to go until the formation of the national grid in the 1920s, which then allowed the scheme to be much bigger, so that you can supply local demand when the stations are running, and then any excess power would go into the national grid, would go into the 132 network, and would go further afield. So it's classified as a run-of-river storage peaking plant. So essentially, it takes water from the river as the natural rivers come in. So that 2/3 of the power is basically 2/3 of the energy that's generated is basically straight out of the river. So we take the water straight out the rivers and through the turbines, and the rest we store. So the two big storage reservoirs are Clatting Shaws and Loch Doon. So when it rains heavily, we can store a lot of water in these reservoirs. And the other reservoirs, Tongland, Kendon, Carsford, Nelson, very small reservoirs, don't have enough capacity to maybe run for the tea time peak. So we make sure that these reservoirs are full for about 5 o'clock at night. Topping up these reservoirs using the big reservoirs and then from natural inflow as well, so that we're running pretty much all of the plant during the tea time peak demand, between 5 and 7 o'clock at night. On average, we run about 25% of the time, so more so in the winter, obviously when it's raining, and less so in the summer. Overall catchment area 400 square miles, so roughly 40 miles top to bottom, north to south, and 10 miles east to west is the catchment area. An average annual rainfall of 1,750 millimetres, which is just above the Scottish average. And storage capacity, again, this was picked up in the original video at the start, 122 million cubic metres, which is enough. It's about 35 gigawatt hours storage capacity. And again, the assets spread over 40 miles, include 6 power stations, 12 turbines, 9 large dams, 6 barrage gates in Loch Ken, 16 kilometres of tunnel and pipeline, 5 fish passes, 22 bridges, most of which are probably accessible road bridges, and 4 pumping stations. So a lot of assets spread over a wide area to maintain and operate. And again, as Claire said, the original head count for the scheme was about 90 people, and we're currently down to about 27. And we've largely managed to do that through automation. And transport as well, obviously, because back in the 30s, people just didn't have cars like they have today, so people had to live basically next to the power stations, and we built villages at Kendon, Tongland, and Glen Lee, where people could stay and walk to work basically. And then I think in total we had maybe about 50 houses across the scheme, including the flat at Tongland, where the operator at Tongland actually lived in the flat. And then the power stations are only manned basically Monday, Friday between 8 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and most of the work gets done during those hours. Outside those hours, it's managed by Crooken. So we basically hand over to Crooken at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They have a screen, a SCADA screen, computer screen, where they can see everything that we can see. They see the same picture that we see in our control room, and we hand over control to them. Obviously, we've got people who stand by for plant faults and emergencies, floods outside of these areas, so any issues with the plant out of hours, crew will phone our guys and they'll come out and do what's necessary. So the pictures on the top right there, you can see Tongan Power Station, and then below that is Carsford Power Station and the dam and reservoir behind it. So the catchment area on the left hand drawn here is roughly the sort of light green area, showing you the sort of rainfall catchment area. And it's two separate rainfall catchment areas. So you basically get the Freesing Galloway, which is 350 square miles, and then Lochdown, which is in East Ayrshire, which is 50 square miles. So again, Lochdown is the biggest storage reservoir. Stores about 18 million cubic metres, and then we've got Clatting Shaws, which is about 30 million cubic metres, and again, Clatting Shaws is about 50 square miles of catchment. So these are the seasonal storage reservoirs. So Lochdown, Clatting Shaws basically go top to bottom once a year. We aim to basically pull the reservoir, these two reservoirs, down to their minimum operating level by the end of roughly end of October, middle of November. We pull them down to minimum, so that we've created maximum storage capacity for winter flooding events and heavy rainfalls over the kind of November, December, January, February time period, and then they'll be pretty much at their maximum in February, and then we'll gradually pull the reservoirs down over the sort of summer months, making sure that we maintain, sufficient water for generation and also for compensation for the fish passes should we see a very dry summer. So the big reservoirs are good from the perspective of drought and for flooding. So they maintain a storage capacity in the winter to absorb the winter floods and obviously protect the land and the properties below the dams, but also during the summer we maintain minimum levels in the reservoirs to make sure that we've always got water for the fish passes. So there could be other areas in Scotland where the rivers are completely bone dry. If you get a drought in the summer, and pretty much the rivers in the Galloway system, Lochdown, will always have water flowing. So top to bottom, Drumjohn Power Station, again, Claire touched on that. That's a relatively new power station built in 1986 under SSEB, 2.2 megawatt output station that was basically built to do the same job as the valve. There was a valve, or there still is a valve on the pipeline there that released water from Lochdown down into Carsford Lane and into Kendon. So, to use that water, to use the energy for that water, they built Drumjohn. So we can transfer water from the water Duke at the top into Lochdown, and then we can bring, when Drumjohn's not running, and then we can bring the water back from Lochdown through Drumjohn. And then we come down Carsford Lane, we come to Kendon Reservoir, so you get water Ken, water Duke, feeds into that. There's 3 dams on the Kendon Reservoir. And then below that you get Kendon Power Station, Carsford Power Station, and Elston. And both of these, also all 3 of these stations run as a cascade, so they all run at the same time. So again, small reservoirs, and basically one is used to top up the next one. So it's important that they run together to maintain the water balance in the system. So they can run as a 50 megawatts or 25 megawatts. And then we've got Glen Lee. So Glen Lee attracts water from Clatting Shaws Reservoir, which is through a 6-kilometre tunnel. Again, Claire touched on that, the construction of the tunnels. And that's 24 megawatt maximum output. And again, both Elston and Glen Lee discharge into Loch Ken. So we control the level in Loch Ken using the barrage gates at Glenlocher. So typically there's a 4-foot operating range there, so that it can fluctuate, not during normal operating conditions, between about 144 and 148 feet. So 148 feet would be the maximum normal operating level. Anything above that, the gates at Glenlocher would be at the water. So if it goes above 148, it's normally during a flooding event. And when during a flooding event, we would lift the gates at Glenlocher at water completely, so that we don't restrict the flow upstream and create any flooding upstream of Glenlocher. And then right at the bottom of the Tongan, so the Tonlin Dam, the Tonlin Power Station, which is the biggest, 33 megawatts, 3 turbines there. Tonlin Dam only holds enough storage for about 2 hours generating at full load at Tonlin. So again, we used the barrage gates at Glen Lee to top up Tonlin for the tea time peak. Okay, so a couple of images, just again, some of the historical stuff. You can see Clarenshaws Dam here during the construction period, and then, you know, the bottom right is the dam constructed and the dam spilling. So not often you see Clarenshaws Dam spilling, maybe once every 2 or 3 years. And Tonlin Turbine Hall. So during construction on the left there, you can see spiral casings. So basically, the spiral casing is the pipe, steel pipe that transfers water from, carries water from the reservoir through the penstock, comes through the spiral casing. There's a set of gate vanes or bucket gates run about this circular area here, and then the runner sits in, the turbine runner sits inside this area here. So the water comes down the pipe, comes down the spiral casing through the bucket gates, and then drops down vertically, and then turns 90 degrees and goes, discharges out the front of the power station. So the picture on the right here, and if you follow the beam that runs along the side of the windows here, this is the same beam that runs in on the other picture. So it gives you a sort of before and after during construction, and then when it was constructed. So this is the turbine hall, photograph taken back in the 1930s, in black and white, obviously. And if you take a black and white picture of Tonlin turbine hall today, it would look pretty much the same. Other than we've got some control panels down here in the turbine hall floor level that we used, that we built to automate the turbines, but pretty much the same. Buildings look exactly the same. And as Claire said, they're category. Tonlin's a category listed building, so it's similar to Edinburgh Castle, and it's got that same level of protection, and rightly so. So when we come to refurbish these buildings, and there is a plan to refurbish Tonlin Power Station next year, so we'll blast the paint, take all the paint off it, renew the windows, paint it, do concrete repairs. Then we'll have to do it exactly the same. The windows will have to be the same, look the same, everything has to be aesthetically similar to what we've got. So Tonlin Power Station, again, the biggest station, 33 megawatts, maximum consumption is 127 metres cubed per second, so 127 tonnes of water per second flowing through the turbines, 6.1 metre diameter penstock tunnel, which is a kilometre long, and you can drive a double-decker bus through it apparently. Electricity, we generate electricity at all the sites, 11 kV. So the turbines all generate 11 kV, and then we can distribute locally onto the local distribution network at 11 kV. And then it'll step down to 415 and then 240 as it comes into people's houses. Any excess generation that isn't absorbed locally will step up to 132. So the substation across the road here. So this is Scottish Power substation, where it steps up to 132 kV and onto the transmission network for power generation further afield. A wee video here of our subs tank. We've got a budding drone pilot that works for us at Glen Lee. So this is the subs tank at Tonlin, and you can see where the water level sits, and you can see the overflow pipe here. So this is the water level here is the same as the water level in the dam. So the subs tank acts as a kind of buffer storage for startups and shutdowns. So when we have a just pause that. If we have a when the station starts up, you see the water level dropping in that, and again you're getting water that's accelerating through the pipeline, and you get pressure fluctuations with that. And again, when the station shuts down, so that you've got a lot of water flowing, that you need to get rid of that stored energy. So the gate vanes will close in the turbines, and then you'll get pressure waves going back up the penstock. So this subtower is to relieve to stop any pressure fluctuations going up and then damaging the concrete tunnel. So you'll see the water will physically rise in here. And if the turbines trip off, you get a sudden, very rapid shutdown of the turbines, and the gate vanes close very quickly, and you'll get an overflow. So the water will come up here It spills through this pipe here, and this pipe drops underneath the power station and discharges at the front of the power station. Okay, so the basic kind of mechanics and physics of the power station is typically you get a reservoir, you get a dam, you get a penstock, you get an intake gates, and you get screens here to filter out any debris. Your turbine runner, you'll have your electrical generator. The transformers are actually outside. We don't own the transformers. It's Scottish Power own the transformers. That's very basic and simple means of generating electricity. Convert energy stored and height, energy stored by the water at height that we bring through the penstock, and convert that potential energy into kinetic energy that spins the turbine. So the amount of power that you can generate with a turbine is restricted by a number of factors, predominantly the head and the flow. So the head would be the difference in the head between the reservoir level and the tailrace level. So the higher you make that, the more output you can get, and also the flow. So Q is the flow, and the flow is determined by the diameter of the pipe. So also the bigger diameter of the pipe, the bigger the flow you can get. And then gravity, density, and efficiency. So the main factors are the head, the height, and the flow, or the height and the size of the pipe. Typical efficiency of a hydro plant is 85%, which is pretty good considering how, compared to other means of power generation, thermal, gas or nuclear or coal or gas turbines, fail 30%, 35% efficiency. So compared to that, hydro is very, very efficient. And, the losses tend to be friction, noise, heat, turbulence, cavitation, transmission losses. So typical performance indicators for a hydro plant. And again, this was our 2020 key performance indicators. So the things that we measure typically are rainfall. So over the 52-week period, we might look at a target or a budget, which is based on the 15-year average rainfall, and then we've got the actual, which is in red. So that gives us an indication of if we're going to be above target in rainfall, you'd expect us to be above target in output as well. So you can see we're kind of following the output trend pretty much. The two red lines here are pretty identical. And again, if we had a very dry year, then you'd see the red line below the blue line. So this is how we kind of make comparisons and rainfall against actual output. We also track availability, so you can see the availability is high at the beginning of the year because the plant is running. We're operationally focused during the months of October to March, and then maintenance focused between April and October. So you can see availability is high at the beginning of the year, but then it drops off because we're doing our maintenance, and then it picks up again as we start to box the turbines back up again, ready for winter generation. And then the bottom right here is the storage. So this is again 52 weeks, and it's storage in the two main reservoirs at Carting Shaws and Locked In. So you can see that we're looking for peak storage around about week 9, and then we're looking for minimum storage around about week 43. So this is a target curve that we follow to make sure that we, as I said at the start, maintain compensation flows and space for the reservoirs for the winter flooding. And then the red is our best attempt at trying to match that blue line. So the main issue really is floods. So every one of these spikes here is a flood. So there's far more water comes into the system than you can possibly discharge at Locked In and Clapton Shaws during flooding events. So you get these flooding events where the reservoir levels increase very quickly, and then it might take you a few weeks to get back on target again. So last year, it took us quite a number of weeks to get back on target again after a few. Again, some of these are due to outages as well. So if we have an outage and we can't run, we can't generate at Glen Lee or from John, and you'll see the reservoir level, the storage levels increasing as well. So one of the key things for us, and this has been more so in recent years, I would say maybe over the last 10 years, we've been very focused on flood risk management, and we've made a lot of modifications to what we do, processes, plant, technology to improve our management of flood risk. chart here shows you rainfall between 1936 and 2016. So the total average annual rainfall for the 6 rain gauging stations that we've got across the site. So we add them up, take an average, and then we plug in the data here. So it shows you over the time that we've been recording rainfall, and at our sites we've shown an increase of about 30% roughly. So we're getting more rainfall clearly, and it won't be a straight line. Things you don't normally get things you go in straight lines in nature. So that's there's a best fitting straight line through the points just to show you that it is increasing. And again, that beyond 2016 is really just extending the curve, extending the line. Obviously that's potentially where it could go, but who can say? So we had Storm Frank in December 2015, which was the highest level of flooding ever recorded. Excuse me, at the Galloway scheme, 125 millimetres in 24 hours, which was approximately a 1 in 150 year event. And this led to a number of changes in how we manage flood risks. Now, 150 year event, it seems, you might think, well, what's the chances of that happening again? And well, we had a 1 in 100 event in 2013 on the 30th of December, on the same day, believe it or not. So we had 1 in 100 event and a 1 in 150 event 2 years apart, exactly. The dams themselves have to withstand a 1 in 10,000 year event. So, and even, they weren't necessarily designed to that standard back in the 30s, but, we have to retrospectively check and prove to, the reservoirs inspectors that they are good for a 1 in 10,000 year event, and they are. So, despite them not being designed for that, clearly they were very well designed and very well built, because, the calculations of the flood studies show that they will withstand a 1 in 10,000 year event. And people say, well, what's the chance of getting a 1 in 10,000 year event? I say, well, it's double what you would get in a 1 in 100 year event. And we've had a 1 in 100 year event, so 1 in 100 year event is just over 100 millimetres of rainfall. A 1 in 10,000 year event is about 220 millimetres of rainfall, I think it is. In December 2015, Carlisle got about 220 millimetres of rainfall. So you remember the flooding in Carlisle, so they get that. So if that flood had moved, 60 miles towards us, we would have had a 1 in 10,000 year event. The main thing is that the dams stand up. They don't release that storage water behind them. But a 1 in 10,000 year event would clearly be a devastating event for our region, for our area. There would be a lot of damage to the stations themselves, but the dams withstand that. So, so one of the other pieces of kit that we've invested in is a bespoke rainfall forecast from a company called Hydromaster. So we pay for a prescribed rainfall forecast for our area. So you can put in pinpoints to identify the source of the rivers, and you can get rainfall forecasts for next 6 hours, next 24 hours, next 7 days. So this is very useful for us predicting what's going to be happening over the next 24, 48 hours in terms of flooding. So this is a live tool that our control room use, and we can dial into this anytime. And it gives us rainfall data, which we can then use to predict how high our reservoirs are going to get, and take whatever actions are necessary to respond to that, which would include, if we see a flood that's been predicted either through our tools, Hydromaster, or even SEPA or the Met Office website, then we take actions such as getting to lower reservoir levels. So we'll start turbines up to try and pull reservoir levels down to try and maximise storage space in the dams prior to the flood coming in. And then, as the flood comes in, we're engaging with stakeholders such as the Galloway Council, the local police, SEPA, local stakeholders. We've got a text messaging system to, I think there's about 40 people right now we send text messages to, for certainly people who are live close to the river's edge or have been flooded in the past. It's really just to give people a heads up and send a text message saying that we're experiencing high rainfall, predicting high river levels, so take whatever action it is you need to take to protect your property. And then we monitor live rainfall as well. So we have 3 rain gauging stations across the patch that we can look at live rainfall. So this was the rainfall that we've seen in the 3rd week in February. So heavy rainfall over a number of days, 133 millimetres over 6 days, which is, when you look back at the 2015 event, that was 125 millimetres. This was 133, but the 2015 was 125 millimetres over 24 hours. This was over a number of days, so there was slightly different. This was like 3 smaller floods back to back, which did create difficulties, albeit the one in 2015 was one big flood. But this is useful because we can set alarms on the rain gauges, so that if we see so many millimetres of rainfall in a 10-minute period, then that would flag up to us that we're seeing heavy rainfall. And again, that's a heads up for our control room staff to take action and start pulling down dams and engaging with stakeholders. And then this is one of our river level gauging stations at Brown Hill, which is on the River Duke, right up at the very top end of the scheme. And again, this was the same week, 3rd week, so there's 14 days here. So the 3rd week in February, where we've seen 3 floods kind of back to back, days apart kind of thing. We would tip, this is the river level here, so we would typically send out our text warning message when the river level reaches 1.5 metres. So again, there was three separate floods back to back. And again, the issue there is, the ground doesn't get time to dry off. The ground is completely saturated. You don't get any absorption of water through the ground following a flood. Plus the reservoirs are filling up as well. The big, as I say, Clapham Shaws locked in can absorb a lot of water, but only up to a point. Clapham Shaws filled up on that day, and it was spilling in 2 days. So they provide protection up to a point. But once they're filled, then that's it. It's basically back to a natural river system, as if you did not have a reservoir. The dams begin to spill naturally. And then the final tool here is this is a a reservoir level forecasting tool that we've got, which is fairly new. So what we do, we basically plug in, it's a spreadsheet, and we plug in existing reservoir level and plug in rainfall data, forecast rainfall data. And it basically gives us this curve here. So this is reservoir level forecast for Kendon Reservoir. So it tells us, the dam level and then the time in hours. So, if we see a flood coming in, we plug in the information that says, right, you're starting here, and then you're going to be pulling down the reservoir before the flood comes in. When the flood comes in, it's going to come up here. Your dam's going to start spilling in 5 hours. It's a spillway in the dam, and then you're going to peak at 514 feet in 10 hours' time, and then 20 hours' time you'll be off the spill. So this is all very valuable information for us. As I say, we need to engage with stakeholders. We need to make sure that we staff on site at the right time, and we need to make sure they get to site in time, because the roads, if you live in the area, you'll know that the roads for about Glen Lee and Loch County flood during natural flooding events. So it's important that we get our staff to site to where they need to be before the roads flood.
Yeah, I was just talking about the work that we do with Galloway Fishery Trust at Tongland, and the vacuum counter that we use to count and photograph the fish that ascend and descend the fish ladder at Tongland. And there's a project running this year to tag smolt on Loch Ken, well, on the whole system from top to the bottom, to tag smolt, to track them, to try and identify if there's any barriers to movement of smolt downstream and back into the sea. So Drax are engaged with that and sponsoring that this year. So, yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Really interesting seeing how it all is, the technology that's come on. It's this amazing. We were just saying that the infrastructure hasn't necessarily changed that much, but yet the control systems and the analysis of it has clearly, obviously moved well into the 21st century, so that you can see things coming, given that you're dealing with Mother Nature and it's inherently unpredictable. But
Yeah.
there were some questions right at the beginning, which I thought was interesting. 9 passes, 5 fish ladders, something like 9 dams, 5 fish ladders.
Mhm.
Does not every dam need a fish ladder, presumably?
No, I mean, the dam's at the very top of the scheme. So, well, Clattering Shores doesn't have a fish pass, and the Ken Dam and the Duke Dam don't have fish passes. And clearly, back in the 30s, the negotiations were between the Galloway Water Power Company and the landowners at the time. Clearly today it would be SEPA that we would be dealing with if we were building dams. But back then, SEPA didn't exist. They obviously had the Salmon Fishery Board, who played a big part in determining, getting the fish passes installed where they are. But clearly they decided not to build fish passes on these 3 dams.
Okay, yeah, so just a sort of historical oversight. Now then, Vivian asked a question, and then I think Roland came in on it as well. Does the electricity for the 70,000 houses remain relatively local, or does it just disappear into the grid? And then kind of on the back of that, you talked about the 11 kV local distribution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And is there possibility in time, could it evolve to be local distribution, battery storage?
I mean, it is a local distribution just now. When we generate, we will provide power to the local villages and towns, and whatever the demand is, it will typically be supplied by us when we are generating. But as I say, we're only generating 25% of the time. So during that time that we are generating, we will be distributing power to the local network. But typically, we'll also be spilling onto the 132 and generating further afield.
I didn't realise that. That's fascinating. I did assume it all disappeared into the national grid. So here's a great question from Neil. How did they remotely control the system in the 1930s, or was it manned full time? It
was manned full time pretty much. So we had people working at every power station 24/7. So we would have men, working round the clock, basically operating everything manually. So they had very little remote indication of anything really. Everything had to be communicated by phone or yeah.
So it's more a function of the technology moving on.
But everything, you can do everything for your laptop now. I mean, I could sit at home and use my laptop and control everything from home. It's amazing, really,
and rapid change as well. Scott was saying about the 4 pumping stations. He thought that the whole system was gravity fed. But there are pumping stations.
So the pumping stations really are there were built after the scheme. They're really for agricultural drainage. So they were there to assist with drainage for agricultural land below Loch Ken, basically. So they don't really form a part of the infrastructure. They're there for other reasons, really.
Yeah, okay, and I now see that Ron did answer to that effect. So yes, a very informed audience that we have. I will say, I will say there's been a strong trend towards restarting the Tungland power station tours. So I don't know if we can feed that back into Drax, but that's been a repeated theme that people love them and would love.
Yeah, it does still run, but it's not an open door policy that we had in the past when it was open during the summer months. We don't open an open door policy. There just wasn't enough footfall to justify it. But we still do school tours. Organised school tours. We still do a lot of school tours, and then any kind of groups, any community groups that are interested in coming, then they just need to contact Drax through the website. The issue just now, apart from the COVID issue just now, obviously, is the building is getting refurbished next year. We're doing some refurbishment work this year, and then the bulkhead will be done next year. But we've been hampered with the COVID, obviously. And then the building refurbishment, but there is the intention to keep the visitor centre open. And as I say, it's 95% of it is local primary schools, but we do get university visits and some local, community groups or clubs that are interested in come for tours, and we can still facilitate that. We just don't have the resources to have a walk-in centre like we have at Crooken, for example.
Yeah, well, that's good to know, and that's maybe new information for people. So yeah, if you make an appointment by that things for a few people. You've touched, you've gone quite heavily into the efforts that are spent on flooding and the fact that 2015 was a 150-year event, but Vincent and Rob brought up Parton. Obviously that was very severely affected, as was Castlefern, to be fair, in 2015.
Yeah.
Is that the
yeah, I mean, and I've had similar calls with Parton Community Council and Castlefern Community Council to discuss flooding events. Typically, we have this, we have these floods every year now, kind of thing. We're seeing floods, but the thing is, these are natural events, and the reservoirs at the reservoirs at Clarting Shaws go a long way to protecting Loch Ken and Castle Douglas. I think we worked out that in the flood of 2015, were it not for the storage capacity at Clarting Shaws, which rose about 8 feet in 24 hours, which is massive, the level in Loch Ken would have been 18 inches higher, and similarly in Carlingwark Loch in Castle Douglas. So there is a big plus there. There is a big flood defence there that people might not know about, but it is there, and we make sure it's managed safely. And
then it gets overwhelmed when the
you can only do so much.
Similarly, Ian was asking about the Castle Douglas flood risk assessment of 2013 suggested raising the height of the Black Park embankments. Is that radar?
I mean, I think there's been some discussion on that locally. The issue again, the embankment was built just after the scheme was built. So prior to the scheme being there was no embankment there. There was basically just Carlingwark Lane, which basically drains Carlingwark Loch. So there was no defences effectively. So when the scheme was built, that was built, and the pumping station was built there again for agricultural drainage. But I think the issue is Gelston Burn also floods into Carlingwark Loch, and both sides rise at the same time. There has been occasions where we've seen water coming over the embankment at Black Park and going into the Carlingwark Loch side, but likewise, you could still get a flooding event where it would flood from the Carlingwark Loch side, and potentially that would inhibit water getting away. I think the council the council commissioned a study in conjunction with ourselves in 2013, but I think it's a difficult one because the embankment and the pumping station can help with some of the smaller flooding events, but with the bigger events, it just gets overtopped. And and the thing about raising the embankments is you're pushing the problem somewhere else. You have to do a flood study to demonstrate that because the water's going to go somewhere. Are you pushing the problem somewhere else? Are you going to create flooding somewhere else by building a higher embankment?
It's all one connected system, isn't it? That's the tricky thing until you get out to the sea, I guess.
Yeah.
Anne said, are there any works required to prepare for the impacts of climate change, i.e. more intense rainfall events, which I think you've potentially covered, but I had an email in from David Briggs, who lives in Canada, I think, and he was watching, but he wasn't sure if he'd be able to ask questions. So he was saying, two questions, but one was, has there been any change in output due to climate change and rainfall over the 85 years? He's saying it's because it's been going 85 years. Have you had a chance to see those trends?
Yep. So the rainfall trend I showed you earlier shows you the increase in 30% increase in rainfall trend. So the output trend has followed a similar curve. So we've seen roughly a 20% increase in output over the 85 years. So you don't, 30% increase in rainfall, you don't see all of that, because during a flood, most of the water will spill over the top of the dams. But we're seeing, one of the benefits, I suppose, you're getting, of higher rainfall is you get more renewable energy. But yeah, what we're seeing is, not only higher rainfall, but higher intensity rainfall,
Yes.
So not just a total increase in rainfall, but the rainfall events, the short duration flooding events over a 24-hour period are becoming more intense.
Yes, and I guess your monitoring systems are helping you with that.
Yeah,
David,
yeah.
David also asked whether I mean, I guess it's all wrapped up, but do you think you've seen any effects of the forestation, as in going from not much forestation to lots of forestation of the area over the 85 years?
It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. We don't have anything that would monitor that, really. It's not really my area, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I can't comment.
Yeah. All right, grand. Ian is asking, why is there only Tungland downriver of Loch Ken? Is there not sufficient head in Loch Ken to supply more?
Not really, no. We did look at actual, small compensation turbines to fit on Glenlocher Barrage in the past, but again, because there's no head, there's a very, as I said earlier, the thing that you need is head and flow, and there's a very low head at Glenlocher, and there's not really, I think the head difference between, so Tongland Dam sits at 120 feet at the spillway, and Glenlocher sits about 144 to 148 feet, so there just isn't anywhere to put in another dam and power stations. The head just doesn't exist.
Yeah, okay, that's a great one.
If you ever get the chance, if anybody ever gets the chance to go to Tongland Power Station, there is in the visitor centre. There's a model, a 3D model in the control room that shows you about another half dozen schemes that were identified in the Galloway catchment that were never built. So they did identify, other sites for potential building potential sites, and then we've retrospectively went back and looked at these maybe 10 years ago to see if it was possible to build, But again, because when building dams is very expensive. Flooding lands is expensive and difficult from a planning consent perspective. So none of them, unfortunately, kind of stacked up, and we weren't able to take any of them forward.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've got one more. Well, Roland's clarifying that he was asking. Yeah, and I know Roland has got an interest in sort of micro energy or a super sort of hyper local energy system. So instead, basically a transition from using it from peak output to using it more of the time to provide the energy for sort of food growing during an extended growing season, and more energy intensive commercial and digital activity. Yes, and then Fiona's added that she has an interest in clean energy and uses lithium deep store batteries too. So it's that thing about battery technology, isn't it? If the battery technology catches up with generation, do you see a small scale?
Well, I don't really know a lot about battery storage. I mean, Crooken Power Station is effectively a huge battery, so you get pump storage at Crooken. 440 megawatts of pump storage, it's an enormous battery, and effectively what that does is, that can, you've got two reservoirs, one at the bottom, one at the top, and when what happens is Crooken will generate when the demand is high, but when the demand is low and maybe you've got a high output on the system, such as you've got high wind, so when there's a lot of wind in the system, the demand is low, then the Crooken will absorb wind power. That could otherwise just be turned off. So if there's too much power in the system, they'll just shut the wind farms down. But if so we need more. We need the Crooken can absorb that power. When there's high generation, low demand, and then it can use it to then generate when the demand is high again. So hydro battery storage has been around for, well, Crooken is 50 years old, over 50. It's been around for a long time. It's well proven. And as I said, Drax are looking to increase the capacity for Crooken as well to do more of that. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I think the questions are slowing down. It's 9:15. There was one question from somebody, maybe a good one to end on. He said, "Is the games room in Tongland, has the snooker table still got a good view of the rally?"
Yes, snooker table's still there. Snooker table's still there. So our staff used to use it. I don't think it gets used as much now. But yeah, it's still there, and it's a cracking view at the window. Yeah.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, I think we are gonna end it there. So just to say thanks so much to Stuart. That was absolutely fascinating and great to hear it from such an expert, and to Claire. Absolutely brilliant. I think new insights there. You know, we keep saying a lot of the work been done by John and by Ted, but you know, you brought it all together and presented it and really took us back in time. So absolutely brilliant. I think that people did enjoy it. So and thanks again to Sarah and Drax for partnering with us on this and on the wider Galloway Glens scheme. So thank you all very much. Yes, so those of you who know us, hopefully know us, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Galloway Glens. We've got a Galloway Glens mailing list. It's infrequent, but hopefully interesting. So you can, if you email myself, helen.kerran@dumgal.gov.uk, I can get you onto that. Our website is interesting and informative, I hope, and it's also got an events page, so that's a good way to stay up to date. This time next week, 28th of April, my colleague Nick Chisholm is doing his last natural history event, which is Plumbing the Depths of a Bog. And he's got 5 fantastic speakers for that. It's going to be so interesting. It's going to span the sort of natural elements of the bog through to the kind of creative response to it, an environmental response. It's a great lineup, so I would heartily recommend that. And then a week after that, busy times, I'm launching, again in partnership with Dumfries and Galloway Council and the Crichton Carbon Centre, launching Galloway Footsteps towards a lighter environmental impact. So this is a Galloway Glens programme where it's going to be 4 events spaced a month apart. We're doing it in partnership with Geeky, G-I-K-I. It's a carbon calculator that has really kind of gamified understanding your carbon footprint and then improving it. And the whole essence of these events is if you think you want to do something and you know you should be doing something, but you're just not sure what you can do and whether it really will make a difference, it's just going to be jam-packed with information about exactly what you can do and exactly how much difference it makes. So when sort of climate change and everything seems a bit overwhelming and you think, well, is there any point me turning off the light? You know, A, yes, there is, and B, there's lots of things we can all do and use our purchasing power and our choices as individuals to make a difference, and these events are all about that. So I'm looking forward to those. I think they're going to be great. We've got a great speaker for the first one, Anna Pitt, who lived on a bag of waste for a year. She generated one bin bag of waste in a year. She's going to be talking to us about that. So do come along to that if you can. Obviously free like they all are, thanks to our National Lottery Heritage Funding. And we'll hope to see you there. So anyway, that's enough. I will stop sharing that and I'll say thanks very much to everybody and hope to see you at some of those events in the future.